What's up? This is Kevin Dana of the Santa Cruz Warriors, and you're rocking with my guy Tanner Oda on the Krossed Over podcast.
The madness is a little bit different this year in men's college basketball. 4 1 seeds make it to the Final Four, which is Florida, Houston, Duke, and Auburn, which is only the second time in the tournament's history and the first since 2008. The women's side has two teams already in the Final Four. That is South Carolina and UCLA. And the women's side will see two more punch their ticket today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crossover Podcast. Today, we review the big upcoming games on both the men's and women's bracket and review some of the Elite Eight matchups. So, first, we will go to the men's side, where the Final Four was finalized yesterday, with first Houston taking down Tennessee 69-50 in what was pretty much a dominant Houston matchup the entire time. They had control of this game from pretty much the opening tip. Auburn took down Michigan State by 6. Auburn pretty much held this game and controlled it the entire way through. Michigan State was always in it, always fighting, but in the end, it is the Tigers who come up on top. And, they gave away a couple late turnovers, but Michigan State couldn't capitalize on them, and Auburn was pretty dominant. I wouldn't say dominant, but, they looked good in this game. It's going to be interesting because Auburn's matchup is against Florida, who ended the game on what I believe is an 18-4 run over Texas Tech. Texas Tech had a 10-point lead with about 4 minutes left, 9-point lead with about 4 minutes left, and they could not hit their free throws down the stretch. And in college, when it's 1-1, you miss the first free throw, you don't get a second. That happened to Texas Tech twice, and Florida, I'm pretty sure, right after those two misses, came down and scored, and they went from down 9 to up 1 within 3 minutes. And it was some clutch shooting, really, really clutch shooting from Florida. Because Texas Tech had all the momentum, but then down the stretch you have Walter Clayton Jr. just going on a tear. He had 30 points in this game, but I'm pretty sure most of those points came from down the stretch or late in the second half. So Florida takes the win, 84-79. They will be facing their SEC rival, which has been a great matchup all year, in Auburn. Now for Houston's opponent, it's Duke, who pretty much dominated Alabama, as much as I did not expect to say that. Of course, I expected Duke to win. I just think they were a little too much for Alabama. I did not know they would be this much for Alabama. They win 85-65. The only time Clemson has been held under 70 this season, plus another matchup earlier on. But Alabama is not usually shut down like this on offense, and unfortunately for them, it comes on the last game of the season as they lost to Duke in the Elite Eight, and Duke will be taking on Houston. So Duke, of course, you have Cooper Flagg, best player in the country. He goes off for, which is crazy to say this, 16 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists. It's not honestly his best game. But the way he played, it looked like he was dominating out there. He was getting blocks. He was, he just looked dominant inside on both offense and defense. Even with the lack of scoring, he can find people. He sets up people. He gets rebounds. He gets big rebounds. And if you take a look at the stats, Duke had 4 players in double figures, all 14 points or above. And that's because Cooper Flagg gets guarded so heavily. He opens up all these other players who are really, really talented to score. Like Tyrese Proctor, he's also an NBA scout. Or is being scouted, sorry. Cooper Flagg's influence is so good because he's such a great player. And he can do so many great things, but he also opens up the space for Duke. I think that's what changed for Duke as the seasons went on. Remember, they struggled a little bit. A little bit early on in the season. Lost it to Kentucky and Kansas. But I think Cooper Flagg has really, found his way in college basketball and then just started dominating it. Alabama is a very fast-paced team who hits a lot of threes. They did neither of these things. They really couldn't play as much fast-paced against Duke because they would shut it down. It wouldn't work. And when Alabama, who is a fast-paced team, that's shut down, and they can't hit threes, one of their biggest things, they're not going to be effective. Duke destroys them by 20. And unfortunately, and for Alabama, that comes in the Elite Eight. So they are out. Duke on to play Houston. Now let's talk about these Final Four matchups. Of course, we've seen Auburn and Florida before. We've seen it before. It's going to be a really good matchup. It's a 1 versus 1 seeds, because they're all 1 seeds. But you take a look early on in the year. Back in February 8th, Florida takes down Auburn on the road 90-81. And then you go even further back. Well, actually, I believe Auburn only took on Florida once. So we've actually only seen this once before. Very, very interesting because, obviously with the SEC having so many teams, which is another topic for another time, you don't play everybody home and home. So Auburn has actually only seen Florida once, which is kind of crazy to think about. Even when I'm looking at the stats, it's kind of hard to believe. It really is. SEC tournament, Auburn got knocked out before they could meet Florida in the finals. Florida beat Tennessee to win it all, the SEC tournament. So this is actually only the second time these teams are meeting. Florida is 1-0 this season, and I have Florida winning again. I think, however, Florida has been in trouble in multiple of these games. They were in trouble against UConn. They were in trouble against Texas Tech. 2 games they could have lost. And obviously, they didn't because they were the better team both games, but they were in trouble both of those games. It was really, really close. They cannot fall down. Or I should say, go into a 10-point hole like they did against Texas Tech if they want to win this game. Auburn will take care of that better than Texas Tech did. So the key for Florida, you don't even have to take a 10-point lead if you're Florida. If you just have the lead down the stretch, I think Florida wins this. I think Auburn, as good as they are, can't match up with Florida as well as they do other teams. I think Florida has been battle tested more than Auburn has. And I think that's going to come key because these 2 teams are going to go into a dogfight down the stretch. So that's why I think Florida has the advantage here. Obviously, I would not be surprised at all if Auburn wins this. They've been pretty much the best team in the country almost all year. They've been ranked number 1 in the AP poll and the coaches poll a lot this year. It's going to be a really good matchup. Houston-Duke. This is one that I believe Duke should win by about 10 points. But Houston coming off that performance against Tennessee, you definitely have to question it. Houston is going to be a really, really good opponent. They're in the Final Four for a reason. And good for them, by the way, because they have had some early exits recently. This is a game also can go either way, of course, with 1 seeds. It's pretty much the 2 versus the 4 in rankings in college basketball. And Duke should win, you would think. But do not be surprised if Houston pulls this one and goes to the finals. I think they're a little bit more experienced than Duke is. I think that's their one advantage. But honestly, I don't see why you don't pick Duke 8 out of 10 times. Honestly. Because Duke is just so dominant. They don't really have too many weak spots. That's why I said the only one thing I think I'd take Houston over is experience. But otherwise, I have Duke winning this matchup. Let's move on. Let's go to the women's side of the bracket where UCLA advanced to the Final Four. Great to see that. South Carolina, 5th time in a row over Duke, who gave them a really, really good game. So did LSU with UCLA. But that South Carolina Duke game down the stretch, wow, that was a battle. Duke just turned it over too many times. South Carolina, you can't do that to them because they just know how to win games. Don Staley knows how to win games. And it's honestly so impressive to watch South Carolina do this over and over again. They are the defending champs going into the Final Four. And so was LSU 2 years ago, I should say. So they have a lot of experience. So to say UCLA, this was a really good win for UCLA. They lost to LSU last year in the tournament in the Sweet 16. That's when LSU, of course, had Angel Reese, but this is still, a team, a lot of returning players from 2024. So UCLA gets the revenge. advances to the Final Four, which is great because UCLA has just been good all year. So today, TCU versus Texas, that is a 2-1 matchup respectively, and then UConn USC also 2-1 matchup. Unfortunately for USC, they lost Juju Watkins to a season-ending ACL injury, which has just completely changed the course of, how we look at their title race this season, their national championship race. And, to me, this is going in UConn's favor in almost every way. USC did really well in fighting against Kansas State, but Kansas State could have won that game, honestly. Like that was a battle. USC did, I think it was very impressive to see them pull that out. I don't think they pull that out against UConn. UConn has Paige Beckers, who is averaging 37 points in her last 2 games. 34 against South Dakota State. 40. Her career high. 40 against Oklahoma, where they beat them 82-59. March Madness is about being hot at the right time. UConn is hot right now. They're probably the hottest team in women's basketball right now. It's debatable in terms of how they've been dominating recently. So I think I have UConn winning this game. I think USC will put up a very good fight. But I think Juju Watkins, the leader of their team, you'll see her presence be missed on the court. I think with Juju, I would even still have UConn, which is debatable. But without her, I think USC will put up a really good fight. I think it will be somewhat close, but I think UConn will pull this out. Really don't see many ways TCU can take down Texas. I mean, it can happen. It could happen, but I just don't really see it. Texas is just a dominant team. But so is TCU. They're both coming in with 34-3 records. So obviously both teams know how to win. So I could see an argument for TCU, but it's really hard for me. I think Texas has this, which would be interesting because if Texas wins, it sets up the third matchup. Actually, no, sorry, the fourth matchup between South Carolina and Texas this season. South Carolina beat Texas at home. Texas beat South Carolina at home, so they both played a home and home. Both of those teams won their home game. Then they met in the SEC tournament final, and South Carolina took care of business, beat Texas. So, if this is Texas-South Carolina, 4th time this season, which is crazy because this is Texas's first year in the SEC. So this is like the first time this rivalry is its birth, basically. This South Carolina-Texas rivalry we might see over the next coming years. It would be a very, very interesting matchup. TCU, South Carolina too, but Texas-South Carolina, 4th matchup of the year would be an insane battle. I think South Carolina would have the edge. They've taken care of Texas 2 out of 3 times. And I think they would take care of them again. But do not be surprised if Texas wins this. But of course, Texas has to beat TCU first tonight at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And then, UConn or USC versus UCLA. We could have 2 teams or 2 matchups where the teams are seeing each other for the 4th time if USC wins. Which I said, of course, I think UConn's going to win. But let's just pretend USC wins right now. This would also be the 4th time that UCLA and USC meet. So imagine if we have South Carolina and Texas, 4th time matchup. And then UCLA and USC, 4th time matchup. USC took down UCLA in the home and home. So USC beat UCLA at UCLA. And USC beat UCLA at USC. And then they met in the Big Ten tournament, and UCLA was like, we're done losing to this team. And they beat them. And UCLA was the Big Ten champs. That's probably why they got the number 1 overall. They were the top overall team in the tournament. Out of all 4 1 seeds, they were the top team overall. So, really interesting if that happens. But like I said, I think UConn's going to win, so let's talk about that a little bit. UCLA, UConn. Wow, what a battle that would be. I think these teams play pretty differently, too. So it'd be a pretty interesting match. If it's UCLA, UConn, I would be about 50-50. I'll be honest. I think UCLA might have a slight edge just because of how they played overall this year. Because they were just so good at the beginning of the season. And they were really good, of course, in the middle and the end, but especially in the beginning of the season. But it matters how you're playing now, and UConn is playing very well right now. Their entire team playing well right now. Specifically Paige Becker, who's going to go into the WNBA draft after this tournament. This is her last, opportunity to win a national championship with UConn and their quote-unquote drought. And I can very well see UConn winning this. I think, personally, the winner, if it's UCLA-UConn, I think the winner of UCLA-UConn will take down either South Carolina, Texas, or TCU. I really do believe that. I just think, UCLA has beat South Carolina. And UConn has also beaten South Carolina. And both of these teams beat South Carolina in blowouts. UConn did it in South Carolina, if that's even more unbelievable. So I believe that these two matchups tonight, TCU Texas and UConn USC, are going to be extremely interesting, especially because of the winner and who they play in the next round, Final Four. It's really, really fascinating to me how these matchups are going to turn out. So please tune in. TCU Texas today, 4 p.m. Pacific time. UConn USC today, 6 p.m. Pacific time on ESPN. Going to be some good matchups. That is it for today's episode of the Krossed Over podcast. I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.